In this case study, we are discussing the incident at Morales, a fictional and shining example of the difficulty between deciding for something to help your career grow or to ensure everyone's safety. Faust Chemical is a company most renowned for its old stripper paint remover that was dominating the market at the time. When the company learns that their competitor, Chemitol, is planning on introducing a new paint remover with better properties and less harmful side effects to the user and to the environment, they decide that their best move is to develop a new and improved product in order to compete with and not lose the market to Chemitol. To minimize market loss to their competitor, Faust wants to release their new paint stripper as closely as possible to the release date of Chemitol's stripper. Therefore, the decision was made to have a 1-year deadline on the project. In order to save money when it comes time for production, Faust decides to construct their new chemical plant in Mexico, which led to the decision of hiring Fred Martinez, a former consultant of Chemitol, as the design engineer over the new plant.
Shortly after this decision was made, Chemistray, Faust's parent company, decided to slash their budget by 20%, causing the VP of Faust to really urge Fred to cut back on construction costs as much as he possibly could. All of this added pressure caused Fred to bring up some suggestions that might normally not be considered. They decided to build the new plant with a few less safety precautions as long as it was still within regulations for their area. Cheaper sensors were used in the Morales plant than in Faust's previous plants, but the sensors were reliable at the relatively low temperature and pressure that was be used in the manufacturing process. He also made the decision to use cheaper pipe couplings that had an unsatisfactory fatigue life. After the plant was finished and they were about to start production, a sample of their competitor's product was obtained and significantly outperformed any product that Faust had produced. This led to the realization that to have a comparable product, they would have to run at significantly higher constraints, which would require much higher temperatures and pressures than originally anticipated. To top it all off, the plants originally designed to use automatically controls in order to run automation with minimum amount of personnel completely fails, and they have to resort to having the plant manager manually control the process. This would not be an ideal, as now there is an individual's life in danger as opposed to being ran autonomously. In the original design for the plant, there was no adequate treatment process for the toxic byproducts that are created during the manufacturing process. This could have led to the contamination of the groundwater in the area from which the locals get their drinking water. This was a huge ethical dilemma for Fred because in Mexico there are no regulations to stop the contamination of water sources, so this would have been legal yet highly unethical. Ultimately, he makes the ethical decision to push within Faust to have lined evaporation ponds. This decision cut into the budget that Chemistray had given them, but also saved many lives and individuals from illnesses. One of the major concerns was there was a proposal to not line the evaporation ponds. These ponds are where the plant was going to dispose of all its hazardous waste. This would result in contaminating the groundwater that the locals use as their primary drinking water. The reason that in this proposal the safety precaution was bypassed was there was a major cut in budget. In the end, Fred Martinez made the ethical choice in having the ponds lined, therefore keeping the drinking water clean even though it took a major portion of the budget. In the United States, there are regulations that keep companies from potentially harming an environment with toxic waste. These regulations are not so-called the same in Mexico. Another place that they tried to save money was on all the couplers on the pipes. Instead of using a coupler that was rated well beyond the requirements needed, they chose one that was just barely had high enough ratings. Because the rating on these couplers was so close to the actual temperature and pressure that was expected to be exerted on them, they would wear quicker, therefore having to be replaced more often. By using the cheaper couplers, this saves them money initially, but in the long run it ends up costing them more from having to replace them more often. Another place where they decided to cut corners was on the quality of the control valves and sensors. These components were essentially going to be used to be able to run the plant completely by automation. The cheaper control valves and sensors were nowhere near accurate enough at the higher temperature and pressures to be dealing with chemicals that, if mixed wrong, would present a hazard. When the plant was finally completed and the first test batches of the stripper was ran, it presented a problem in the consistency of the product. This problem was created by the inadequate controls. With having different ratios of chemicals caused it to have different reactions where it would have a greater temperature and raise the pressure in the tanks. Also, to achieve the consistency that they wanted, they initially raised the chemicals to a higher pressure. With having the higher pressure than expected when the plant was designed, it created a problem with the cheap couplers used on the pipes because now they are being exposed to pressures and temperatures higher than they were rated for. The couplers showed signs of leakage, but it was determined that with constant maintenance they would be fine. This is another area that in the long run cost them more money and was not addressed as a design issue. The automatic controls became unreliable, which was the essentially cause to the consistency being off. To fix this problem with the controllers, they decided to have a plant worker control the ones that were presenting a problem manually and time it with his watch as to how long to leave the valves open. Still, this was not as precise as the higher quality control valves would have been. Many decisions were made not thinking about the safety of public or the workers that would be in the plant. From these decisions, it resulted in the plant worker that had to manually operate the controls to be killed in a plant accident. Yes, you have to make decisions where you're going to maximize product or come closer to a deadline or budget, but to be ethical, you cannot cut corners on safety. With all the changes in the specifications in producing the stripper, they should have redesigned the plant to meet these, even if it delayed opening of the plant. At the least, they should have replaced the couplers and controls with ones of higher quality and ratings before starting production instead of just scheduling it later down the road when they had the budget.